So today is the second day of Tevet and the 26th of December. And we're learning from Likkutei Sichot volume 1 on Chanukah. And we're on page 80 in chapter 15. And this is the last Sicha in this volume on Chanukah. So let's see what he has to say. Today is the last day of Chanukah. It's called Zot Chanukah because of what we read in the Torah today. Zot Chanukat HaMizbeach. Today is the inauguration of the altar. Mitzvat ner Chanukah shona mikol mitzvot b'shnayim. Chanukah candles are different than all the other commandments that we have in two respects. First, b'chol hamitzvot yishna derech shel kiyum mitzvah kitukunav shegam derech shel hidur mitzvah. Aval en hidur min hahidur. In all the commandments, we have a way to perform the mitzvah as the Torah commanded it. And even as the sages added the different stipulations that go together with the different requirements that the mitzvah has. But there's also many times a way to do a hidur mitzvah. Hidur mitzvah is really to beautify the mitzvah, make it more beautiful. But I've seen that Rav Steinsaltz usually translates this as being more meticulous. Either one is fine, because paying attention to more details is a way of making it more beautiful. Because when you think about beauty, beauty has to fit the subject. So if you're talking about a building, so it's how you're going to finish, how you're going to do the finishes. It wouldn't do to say, oh, this building is more beautiful because the concrete is stronger. No, I don't know. It has to be something external that you can see on the outside. So being meticulous when you do a mitzvah is part of the aspects of what it means to do a mitzvah in the first place. It has to be part of it. So you can call it being more beautiful, taking more care to beautify it. You can also say this being more meticulous. But there is no such thing as the more beautiful of the beautiful. You don't have two levels of beautifying the mitzvah or being extra meticulous. There's a mimer in Baba Kama that talks about how much money should you spend in order to be more meticulous in your performance of a mitzvah. Is there a limit to it? So Gemara says yes, ad shlish, a third of the value of the mitzvah. And this is a very big principle that's used across a lot of different subjects, a lot of different mitzvot. This idea of a third being what it means to beautify a mitzvah. That up to a third he invests in it, and from here on it's God's. What does that mean? It means that a third you invest in it, and beyond that you can take from money that goes anyway to Hashem. But in any case, what you see is you can beautify as much as you want, up to a third from your own funds, and the rest as much as you want from God's funds, as it were. What does this mean then? That we see that there's only one level of hidur mitzvah. We don't say there's two levels. We don't say there's hidur mitzvah and then mehadrim min hamehadrim is going to take from God's. No, you can't do that. Whatever you invested, that's your investment, that's your beautification of the mitzvah. לעומת זה, במצוות נר חנוכה ישנו לא רק המצווה עצמה, ולא רק הידור מצווה, כי אם גם מהדרין מן המהדרין. But when it comes to the Hanukkah candles, a lot of people don't know that the mitzvah itself is, first of all, that you should light a candle. The owner of the home lights one candle every night. And in that sense, we talked about this actually yesterday, it would be like the menorah, except the menorah, they lit 7 candles. Because obviously it's a more important place, the temple, so they had 7. But in any case, the stipulation for the mitzvah is really just one candle. Then it says, Ner ishu veito, the mehadrin, what we call beautifying the mitzvah, is that every member of the household lights one candle. And the mehadrim min hamehadrim, but here we have a second level of beautifying it, is that every day, every member of the household adds one. Or at least the owner of the house. So adding one every day, that's already a second level of beautifying the mitzvah. I'm going to take this off. So we have these two levels of beautification. that's the first thing that's different between the Hanukkah candle and other mitzvos that we have. Secondly, in the second respect that the Hanukkah candle is different than all the other mitzvot, we see that in other mitzvot, most of the people only fulfill the basic obligation. They don't even beautify. They're not even meticulous. ואילו בנר חנוכה מנהג כל ישראל לקיים לא רק את המצווה עצמה, כי אם גם את ההידור ואף את ההידור מן ההידור. But when it comes to the Hanukkah candles, we see that almost everybody, to such an extent that people don't even know, that the basic obligation was really only to light one candle every evening. So everybody does the hidur min a-hidur, meaning the beautification of the beautification. So those are the two respects in which Hanukkah candles are different. First of all, in the fact that there is a second level of being meticulous or beautifying the mitzvah, and then most of the people perform this second level and not the basic obligation. On Hanukkah there were, this is famous by the Rebbe, that there were two miracles that happened. And I've seen year after year, everybody has a problem, or not everybody, but a lot of people have a problem with the Rambam, the way the Rambam writes it. In the first halacha he writes, the Maccabees, the Chashmonaim, they were successful in their rebellion against the Hellenists. And then they were able to establish a Jewish monarchy for upwards of 200 years, he writes. The second halacha he writes, the Jewish people, he doesn't write about the Maccabees, he says the Jewish people were able to be victorious against the Hellenists. A separate thing. And when they were able to take back possession of the temple, they entered, and they couldn't until they didn't have oil, and then they found oil, and they lit it for 8 days. And because of this, in the third halacha, he says, and now third halacha, he writes the third paragraph, and because of this, it was on that day, he says there, that on the 25th of Kislev is the day that they entered the temple. And then in the third halacha, he says, for that reason, from the 25th and on, for 8 days, we celebrate by, and he writes like this, he writes, Halel Voda, with Hallel, meaning praising God, and saying the Hallel, which is a mitzvah from the sages. One of the 7 mitzvahs that the sages added is 613. So we have altogether really 620, which we know is the gematria of Keter, right, of crown. And we light candles for 8 days. So the Rebbe has a shita. The Rebbe's shita is very simple. That what the Maccabees, the Chashmonaim, were victorious about, for that reason we say the Hallel. That's the mitzvah of Hallel that we have every morning. And for the fact that the Jewish people were victorious in general, and they were able to repossess the temple and light the candles again in the menorah, for that reason we, for 8 days, light candles. That's the way that the Rebbe has, throughout all the Sichos that he talked about, he took these two aspects, and he said they make up Hanukkah. And they're different. One of them is about a military victory, the other one is about a spiritual miracle. And they're just different in that respect. So he says here, in Hanukkah there were two miracles. The first one was the victory in the war, which is why we say Hallel and we say Al Anisim in our prayers. The Hoda'ah means to acknowledge or to concede or to praise. Hallel is more to praise, but just to concede is to acknowledge that God did something here. So we say that every time we pray and every time we say Birkas Hamazon, the grace after meals. And the second aspect, the second miracle was Nespach HaShemen, that they found oil and they were able to light from it 8 days. And because of that, they instituted that we should light candles. So we have these two elements coming together in Hanukkah. What is this? The Arizal, when he discusses Hanukkah, he doesn't have a lot of discussion about it, but he has some discussion. One of the main questions that he's left with, and everybody who learns them is left with, is which Hanukkah and Purim go together, because they were both holidays that were instituted after the Bible was, in a certain sense, completed already, but it's not from the Torah in any case. So, he knows that they're netzach and hod. He knows that they correspond to the 2 feet, to the victory and to the acknowledgement, to the right foot and to the left foot. Netzach and hod. But he leaves you unclear about which is which. So usually when somebody leaves you unclear about which is which, it means that it's actually the both are both. And so the usual explanation is that the netzach, the victory in Hanukkah, is the victory of the Maccabees, of the Chashmonaim. And the Hallel, and the Hod, and the acknowledgement, that is the miracle of the oil. That's how it's explained, and then that's how the Rebbe's Shita actually works. Okay. So now, there's something a little bit different. העניין שמהדרין מן המהדרין לא קיים במצוות הלל והודאה, כי אם במצוות הדלקת הנרות הקשורה בנס פח השם. We don't find the beautification of the beautification in this praising God and in acknowledging Him in our prayers. Rather, we only find it regarding the candles. So what does this mean? That it's a greater miracle. Because if there was a way to do beautification in the Hallel, we would do it. We would say, for instance, you don't say Hallel just in Shachris. Those who are meticulous will also say Hallel Mincha, something like that. Okay? Or like we do on the eve of the 7th day of Pesach. Say it on the first day of Pesach. We would say it at night. But we don't do that. There's no beautification of the mitzvah when it comes to the Hallel, when it comes to praising God. יתרון נס פח השם לגבי כל הניסים בכלל נס ניצחון במלחמה יובן אחר הקדמת ההסבר שבהנהגות שלמעלה ישנם 3 סוגי הנהגות. So we have to explain why this miracle is considered to be so different, that it has this additional level of performing the commandment that came out of it, of lighting candles, 1 to 8 candles every night for every member of the household. So there are 3 types of ways in which God runs the world, is what he's going to call it now. Hanagot. Hanagot, this is actually language that's not so much from Hasidic, call it nomenclature. This comes from more the Ramchal, Gra type of thinking. And but even in Chassidus, there is such a thing as Hanagot, how God runs the world. For them, how God runs the world was the main explanation of Kabbalah. Meaning, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzachot, Yesod, Malchut, these are all ways in which God runs the world. In Chassidus, we know that these are interpreted more, of course they're also that, but they're interpreted more in the direction of how do these play out in our psychology? How do they play out in the nefesh? How do they play out in every individual? Okay. So the first type of Hanaga, the first way in which God runs the world, is called Tivit, natural. שהיא עצמה עשויה להיות מוצלחת, אבל בכל זאת הצלחה שעל פי הטבע. It can be very successful, that God runs the world. What does it mean that God runs the world? You see that it's God running the world, it's not something else. And it can be very successful, but it is within the confines of nature. That's the first type. Natural type of what we call providence. The second is called Hanaga Nisit, miraculous providence. Hana'alet min haTeva, which is above nature already. בדרגה כזו, היה גם ניצחון המלחמה שבחנוכה נס שהוא נעלה מן הטבע, שכן היה זה גיבורים ביד חדשים רבים באמתים. This was the type of miracle that they experienced in conquering the Hellenists. It was within nature, but a little bit above nature. It wasn't something they didn't see like miracles happening, but the fact that few people that were weaker were able to win against the stronger, that was a big deal. But it was still within the you could still say that it's somewhat natural. It's above nature, but it's not that type of miracle that breaks nature apart. הייתה זו גם הצלחה, שכן הייתה אז מלחמה, אבל לא נס. So it wasn't exactly you can't call it a miracle. You can say they had superhuman strength, but it was human. In the end, they were human beings. אך גיבורים ביד חדשים רבים מעטים הוא נס הנעלה מן הטבע. So the fact that they were few and they were weaker, that was already superhuman. There was something there that is above nature, but it's still connected to nature. But then, so you could call it a miracle, but it's not a miracle in the sense that nature completely changed. It's a miracle in the sense that it's more of, it's a higher degree But then he has what he calls super miraculous providence. Hanaga na'alet min hanes. Inyan she'eino chachim mishum inyanei haguf. It's not connected at all to the body. Materials don't act this way. They don't do this. Or av shel hanshama. Even the soul doesn't do this. So it's not whether it's spiritual or material. There's something about the way everything acted that it doesn't act this way. אלא דבר של הידור מתבטא בענייני הנשמה, כך היה נס מציאת השמן הטהור, דבר שהיה כרוך בנשמה. Sorry, I didn't say it correctly. That it's not the way the matter acts, but it's something that the soul can act this way. So what happened here was that the soul was revealed, he says, and that's what led to the discovery of the pure olive oil. דבר שהיה כרוך בנשמה, it was connected to the soul. ויתרה מזו, כדי להראות חיבתם של ישראל, שכן לפי ההלכה היה אפשר להדליק גם בשמן טמא, משום שטומאה דחויה, או הותרה בציבור, והנס היה כדי להראות חיבתם של ישראל. And moreover, this was a miracle because they didn't have to use pure olive oil. This is a big, wasn't required because you can use impure olive oil, which is a thing that a lot of people don't know. But they were persistent and they said, since we already have this great victory, we don't want to leave it this way. We don't want to leave it just as a victory, just as something within providence. The soul's coming out. So we want to do something extra special. What's the extra special? It doesn't make any sense that the olive oil that we have, which is enough for one day, will now last for 8 until we can make new pure olive oil. Even though they didn't have to use it. They could have used any of the impure oils that they found, because when there is impurity that everyone shares, and no one is pure. Okay, so these are the 3 levels. So now what he's going to say is, and we'll cut to the point, is that hidur min hidur. When?
We'll finish it tomorrow.
How tomorrow? It's not Hanukkah anymore.
So we'll still finish it.
We'll finish it tomorrow.
Yeah?
Okay. Okay, just to recap. So we have the natural providence, what he calls miraculous providence, which is still connected to nature. It's like nature going beyond itself. And then he has super miraculous providence, which is a completely different level, which comes to the soul. It doesn't come from the matter of the world. So these 3 he's going to correspond them to the way that we keep mitzvot. The 3 levels of mitzvot correspond to these 3 levels of how God runs the world. And I guess we'll continue tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning, anyway, when we're done, it'll still be Hanukkah and